Great. Well, I'm here with Frank Perry at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History, and I will ask him to introduce himself, and I have a series of questions as a way to highlight the work of local paleontologists.
I'm Frank Perry, and I am a research associate at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History.
Frank, what did you enjoy most about being a paleontologist?
For me, the most exciting thing about being a paleontologist was discovering new things, in some cases kinds of animals that nobody had ever seen before or knew existed. So the thrill of discovery is what I like best.
I can relate. When did you know that you wanted to be a paleontologist, and what was your career training?
Well, I sort of came into paleontology gradually. I loved all aspects of natural history growing up, and I lived near some areas where one could go out and look for fossils, and my parents were very, very supportive. They would take me on fossil digs. Later on, when I was in college, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to major in geology or in biology. And by going into paleontology, it combined the two and gave me a broad, a broad general background in the natural sciences.
Great. And if I can ask, where did you grow up, and where were some of the first places you remember exploring for fossils in your youth?
I grew up here in Santa Cruz, and there was an article in the newspaper about how one could find fossil shark teeth in the sand hills near Scotts Valley. My parents thought that was interesting, so they took me up there. I don't think we found any on the first trip, but later on I got so I could find them. But I was very young. That was probably when I was only in, first or second grade, something like that.
Wow. Well, we've been focusing quite a bit on the Parissima Formation at Capitola Beach. And from your perspective, what's unique about the unit there? And have you examined particular fossils from that formation that are unique or surprising to you over the years?
There are several things that are unique about that locality, and one of them is the quality of preservation of the fossils. It's just amazing. Some of the mollusk fossils still have traces of the original coloration on the shells, even though they've been buried in the earth for several million years. So it's really quite impressive and unusual.
Right. Yeah, it is really well preserved, as you mentioned, in some of those horizons. How have your collaborations with other scientists helped to inform our understanding of the local geology and paleontology?
Well, working with other scientists has been extremely important because I'm kind of a generalist. I've studied mostly particular localities and tried to come up with lists of all the different fossils from that locality. But I'm not an expert on any particular taxonomic group. So if I find a certain kind of clam and I don't know what it is, then I need to go to a clam expert.
Right. Well, museums are such special places, as you know, and we'd love to have you highlight your history and association with the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History.
I started here at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History as a volunteer. I was still in high school at the time. This was in the very early 1970s. And I really gained an incredible amount of knowledge and experience working here, working with people who were older and more experienced than me. I later on became a paid staff person here, and then for a while I served as a volunteer on the board of directors, and then I did a lot of paid consulting work as an independent contractor, helping set up exhibits and things like that. And now, almost 50 years after I started as a volunteer, I'm a volunteer on the collections committee. So it's come full circle.
It's great. And what are some of your favorite parts of the museum, exhibits you think are especially unique, and what do you most want the public to know about the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History?
This museum is unusual in that it is in a fairly small town. Most towns the size of Santa Cruz, which has, I think, about 56,000 people, do not have a natural history museum. They're mostly in big cities. So I was very fortunate growing up in a town that had a natural history museum, because this museum changed my life. And this museum is quite old. It got its start in 1905. When a woman who lived in Santa Cruz donated her collections to the people of Santa Cruz. She was a naturalist, and she was also the keeper of the Santa Cruz Lighthouse. Her name was Laura Hecox. So that is another aspect of the museum's history that is very special and quite unusual.
Great. Yeah, I understand the exhibit across the way that has the specimen drawers. Was that originally from the lighthouse keeper, or reflects just some of the original material specimens that she described, right?
Yes, that is a collection that she put together, and she actually put that together to give to a school. And so it shows a pretty good sampling of the kind of things that she was interested in.
And I realize when you have a museum of natural history, as you said, in a city that's relatively small, but it's so rich in natural beauty, you want to include a range of things to display and highlight. So how does the museum decide, what to focus on in each room, or what might be of interest to the public?
Well, Santa Cruz County is extremely diverse in terms of its natural features. You have the ocean and the mountains and the redwood trees and the valleys. And so this museum reflects that diversity. So there are displays about the ocean, and we have a rich geologic history, so there are geology and fossil displays. And then there's a room with displays about the different habitats and the kinds of plants and animals of those habitats.
Okay.
All right.
Is that it? Okay.
Okay, well, I'll say just a few words about Laura. Laura Hecox, like me, was very interested in natural history from a young age. She started collecting seashells when she was a little girl, and eventually had her own private museum in the Santa Cruz Lighthouse. She corresponded with a lot of different eminent scientists of the day, and a paleontologist at the U.S. Geological Survey even named a species of fossil snail in her honor.
And it looks like a mix of things, from things directly on the beach that she would observe or collect, and as you mentioned, many people would give her items, give her.
And it was in a school for a long time, so you know what happens to things in schools.
Right.
Things can get kind of mixed up a little bit, but you'd be interested in this, Lisa. She gave this to the California School for the Deaf. And when they moved out of their old site, they knew about the connection with this museum, and so they thought it'd be nice for it to kind of go home, so to speak.
No, it's great. And I think, wow, they don't really even make things like this anymore. Just the quality of the materials, and perfect in terms of fitting. And see, this looks like it might be.
Yeah, I don't know how it worked. Probably she donated the specimens, and probably the school bought the cabinet, would be my guess.
That could,
She was good friends with one of the teachers there, and her nephew, Douglas Tilden, was a student there.
Okay. As in Tilden Park, named after you?
I don't think that Tilden Park is connected, but he was a very famous sculptor. And in fact, there's a statue right next to the building that you're at Berkeley called about the football players.
Right.
That's one of his works.
Who knew? Frank, how does the museum acquire fossils? And I understand this particular one has an interesting history.
Well, some of the fossils are ones that volunteers have gone out and collected for the museum, but most of them are ones that people have donated over the years. Amateur fossil hunters have collected a lot of the fossils, and then they donated some of their collection to the museum. This particular one has an interesting history. This skull of a mastodon was discovered many years ago by a high school student. And we went and collected it and got permission from the property owner and everything to collect it and have it here in the museum. So we're very fortunate to have that. Mastodon fossils are more common in the eastern United States than they are here in the west.
Right.
So this is a little bit unusual.
Okay. In the shark display, I understand that there are also some specimens that were collected by a young person.
Yes, yeah. This very large shark tooth from the megalodon shark was collected by a little boy who was only about 8 or 9 years old. And that was quite a long time ago, but thanks to the generosity of him and his family, we've been able to have it on display here for many years.
Great.
And some of the other fossil shark teeth in the display were collected by a local math teacher, and that was his hobby, was collecting fossils.
Right. Yeah, and that's why museums are such important repositories of fossils, specimens, a range of information that locals can benefit from.
Well, when somebody finds a fossil and they don't know what it is, they can bring it here, and we can compare it with other fossils that have been found in the past. And so that's one of the very important jobs of museums.
Yep. Well, part of the reason why we're highlighting museums in the virtual field experience modules is we want educators and students to understand the value of preserving specimens that we find, cataloging them, and sharing information with the broader public. And I notice in this particular exhibit, you have a range of fossils on display with information about them.
Yes, that's very important. For each fossil that comes into the museum, we catalog it and write down exactly where it came from and who collected it and when it was collected, and any other important facts about the fossil. Some of these fossils here are also ones that were collected by a student.
Okay.
He donated them many years later, but he was a high school student. He collected these beautiful crab fossils.
They're nice.
And also this fossil starfish.
Oh.
And nobody else has found anything that good since.
Okay. Amazing.
At that locality where it came from, and he collected that in the late 1930s.
Wow.
So it shows you the importance of preserving these things in a museum.
Absolutely. And I like the variety of taxa that are in this particular case, from several different invertebrate groups and vertebrates. You've got some trace fossils. The burrow here is nice. Looks like there's some fossil plants as well.
Yes, the idea of this exhibit is to show the diversity of fossils here in this area.
Okay.
And they are all ones that are, have fabulous stories to tell, whether at the microscopic level or great big giant vertebrates.